Welcome back to the BFG. In the last part, Sophie and the BFG were on their way back from Dream Country and stopped and decided to play a little trick on one of the giants. And the BFG blew a dream into the giant's face while he was sleeping, and it was a troggle humper. And a troggle humper it was. A troggle humper, remember, is a nightmare. And so they watched as the nasty, mean flesh lump eater had a nightmare and ended up waking all the other giants up, and they got into a fight. Anyway, it was fun times, and I'm glad those giants got what they deserved a little bit. In this chapter, it's called Dreams. So let's get started. The big friendly giant was seated at the great table in his cave, and he was doing his homework. Sophie sat cross-legged on the top of the tabletop nearby, watching him at work. The glass jar containing the one and only good dream they had caught that day stood between them. The BFG, with great care and patience, was printing something on a piece of paper with an enormous pencil. "What are you writing?" "Every dream is having its special label on the bottle. How else could I be finding the one I am wanting in a hurry?" "Can you really truly tell what sort of dream it's going to be simply by listening to it?" Sophie asked. "I can," said the BFG. "But how? Is it by the way it hums and buzzes?" "You is less or more right. Every dream in the world is making a different sort of buzzy hum music, and these grand swashboggling ears of mine is able to read that music." "By music, do you mean like tunes?" "I's meaning tunes." "Then what do you..." "I's not meaning tunes," he told her. "Then what do you mean?" Sophie said. "Human beings is having their own music, right or left." "Right," Sophie said. "Lots of music. And sometimes human beings is very overcome when they is hearing wondrous music. They's getting shivers down their spindles, right or left." "Right," Sophie said. "So the music is saying something to them. It is sending a message. I do not think the human beings is knowing what that message is, but they is loving it just the same." "Well, that's about right," Sophie said. "But because of these jump-squiffling ears of mine," the BFG says, "I is not only able to hear the music that dreams is making, but I is understanding it also." "What do you mean, understanding it?" Sophie asked. "I can read it. It talks to me like a language." And here we see the BFG and Sophie as they work on their dream labels. Sophie's sitting on the table. BFG is writing on the label. "I find that just a little hard to believe," Sophie says. "I'll bet you is also finding it hard to believe in quagwinkles and how they is visiting us from the stars." "Of course I don't believe that," Sophie said. The BFG regarded her gravely with those huge eyes of his. "I hope you will forgive me if I tell you that human beings is thinking they is very clever, but they is not. They's nearly all of them not-muchers and squeak-pips." "I beg your pardon," Sophie said. "The matter with the human being is that they is absolutely refusing to believe in anything unless they is actually seeing it right in front of their own schnozzles. Of course, quagwinkles is existing. I is meeting them oftenly. I is even chittering to them." He turned away contemptuously from Sophie and resumed his writing. Sophie moved over to read what he had written so far. The letters were printed big and bold, but were not very well formed. Here's what it said. "This dream is about how I is saving my teacher from drowning. I is diving into the river from a high bridge, and I is dragging my teacher to the bank, and then I is giving him the kiss of death." Here's a picture of the dream. "The kiss of what?" Sophie asked. The BFG stopped writing and raised his head slowly. His eyes rested on Sophie's face. "I was telling you once before," he said. that I was never having a chance to go to school. I was full of mistakes. It's not my fault. I do my best. You is a lovely little girl, but please remember that you is not exactly Miss Know Everything yourself. I'm sorry, I really am. It is very rude of me to keep correcting you, she told him. The BFG gazed at her for a while longer, then he bent his head again to show how to his slow, laborious writing. Tell me honestly, if you blew this dream into my bedroom when I was asleep, would I really and truly start dreaming about how I saved my teacher from drowning by diving off the bridge? More, said the BFG. A lot more, but I cannot be scribbling the whole grope-flunking dream on a titchy bit of paper. Of course there is more. The BFG laid down his pencil and placed one massive ear close to the jar. For about 30 seconds he listened intently. Yes, he said, nodding his great head slowly up and down. This dream is continuing very nice. It's a very Dory hunky ending. How does it end? Sophie asked. Please, tell me, how does it end? You would be dreaming that the morning after you was saving the teacher from the river, you was arriving at school, and you was seeing all 500 pupils sitting in the assembly hall, and all the teachers as well, and the head teacher is there standing up and saying, I was wanting the whole school to give 3 cheers for Sophie because she is so brave and is saving the life of our fine arithmetic teacher, Mr. Figgins, who was unfortunately pushed off the bridge into the river by our gym teacher, Miss Amelia Upscotch. So 3 cheers for Sophie. And the whole school is then cheering like mad and shouting, bravo, well done, and forever after that, even when you was getting your sums all gone, swizzled, and muggled up, Mr. Figgins is always giving you 10 out of 10 and writing good work, Sophie, in your exercise book. Then you is waking up. I like that dream, Sophie said. Of course you like it. It's a fizz wizard. He licked back of the label and stuck it on the jar. I was usually writing a bit more than this on the labels, but you was watching me and making me jumpsy. I'll go and sit somewhere else, Sophie said. Don't go. Look in the jar carefully, and I think you'll be seeing this dream. Sophie peered into the jar, and there, sure enough, she saw the faint, translucent outline of something about the size of a hen's egg. There was just a touch of color in it, in a pale sea green, soft and shimmering and very beautiful. There it lay, this small, oblong, sea green jellyfish thing at the bottom of the jar, quite peaceful, but pulsing gently, the whole of it moving in and out ever so slightly, as though it were breathing. It's moving, Sophie cried. It's alive. Of course it's alive. What will you feed it on? Sophie asked. It is not needing any food. Well, that's cruel, Sophie said. Everything alive needs food of some sort, even trees and plants. Well, the north wind is alive. It is moving. It touches you on the cheek and on the hands, but nobody is ever feeding it. Sophie was silent. The extraordinary giant was disturbing her ideas. He seemed to be leading her towards mysteries that were beyond her understanding. A dream is not needing anything. If it is a good one, it is waiting peaceably forever until it was released and allowed to do its job. If it's a bad one, it is always fighting to get out. The BFG stood up and walked over to one of the many shelves and placed the latest jar among the thousands of others. Well, please, can I see some of the other dreams? Sophie asked him. The BFG hesitated. Nobody has ever seen them before. But perhaps, after all, I is letting you have a little peep. He picked her up off the table and stood her on the palm of one of his huge hands. He carried her towards the shelves. Over here is some good dreams. The Fizz Wizards. Would you hold me closer so I can read the labels? Sophie said. My labels is only telling bits of it. The dreams is usually much longer. The labels is just to remind me. Sophie started to read the labels. The first one seemed long enough to her. It went right around the jar, and as she read it, she had to keep turning the jar. This is what it said. I was sitting in class and I discovered that if I was staring very hard at my teacher in a special way, I was able to put her to sleep. So I keep staring at her, and in the end, her head drops on her desk and she goes fast asleep and snorkles loudly. Then in marches the head teacher, and he shouts, "Wake up, Miss Plumridge! How dare you go to sleep in class? Go fetch your hat and coat, leave this school forever. You is sacked." But in a jiffy, I was putting the head teacher to sleep as well, and he just crumples slowly to the floor like a lump of jelly, and there he lies all in a heap and starts snorkeling even louder than Miss Plumridge. And then I was hearing my mummy's voice saying, "Wake up, your breakfast is ready." Here's the head teacher asleep in the dream. "What a funny dream," Sophie said. "It's a ring beller. It's Wopsy," said the BFG. Inside the jar, below the edge of the label, Sophie could see the putting to sleep dream lying peacefully on the bottom, pulsing gently, sea green like the other one, but perhaps a little larger. "Do you have separate dreams for boys and girls?" Sophie asked. "Of course. I was giving a girl's dream to a boy. Even if it's a really whopsy girl's dream, the boy would be waking up and thinking what a rot, bungling, grung, sludging old dream that was." "Yeah, boys would," Sophie said. "These here's all girls' dreams on this shelf." "Well, can I read a boy's dream?" "Well, you can," said the BFG. He lifted her to a higher shelf. The label on the nearest boy's dream read as follows. "I was making myself a marvelous pair of suction boots, and when I put them on, I was able to walk straight up the kitchen wall and across the ceiling wall. Well, I was walking upside down on the ceiling when my big sister comes in, and she is starting to yell at me as she always does, yelling, 'What on the earth is you doing up there walking on the ceiling?' And I looks down, and I look down at her, and I smiles, and I says, 'I told you you was driving me up the wall, and now you has done it.'" "I find that one rather silly," Sophie said. "Boys wouldn't. It's another ring beller. Perhaps you has seen enough now." And here's a picture of the boy standing on the ceiling talking to his sister. "Let me read another boy's one," Sophie said. And the next label read, "The telephone rings in our house, and my father picks it up and says it is in his very important telephone voice, 'Simpkins speaking.' Then his face goes white and his voice goes all funny, and he says, 'What? Who?' And then he says, 'Yes, sir, I understand, sir, but surely it is me you is wishing to speak to, said not my little son.' My father's face is going from white to dark purple, and he is gulping like he is a lobster stuck in his throat, and then at last he is saying, 'Yes, sir, very well, sir, I will get him, sir.' And he turns to me and he says in a rather special, respectful voice, 'Is you knowing the President of the United States?' And I says, 'No, but I expect he is hearing about me.' Then I is having a long talk on the phone and saying things like, 'Let me take care of it, Mr. President. You'll bungle it all up if you do it your way.' And my father's eyes is goggling right out of his head, and that is when I was hearing my father's real voice saying, 'Get up, you lazy slob, or you'll be late for school.'" "Boys are crazy," Sophie said. "Let me read the next one." Sophie started reading the next label. Here's the boy talking to the president on the phone. Okay, here's the next dream. "I was having a bath and discovering if I press quite hard on my tummy button, a funny feeling comes over me, and suddenly my legs is not there, nor is my arms. In fact, I has become absolutely invisible all over. I was still there, but no one can see me, not even myself. So my mummy comes in and says, 'Where is that child? He was in the bath a minute ago, and he can't possibly have washed himself properly.' So I says, 'Here I is.' She says, 'Where?' And I says, 'Here.' And she says, 'Where?' And I says, 'Here.' And she yells, 'Henry, come on, quick!' And when my daddy rushes in, I was washing myself, and my daddy sees the soap floating around in the air. But of course he is not seeing me and shouts, 'Where are you, boy?' And I says, 'Here.' And he says, 'Where?' And I says, 'Here.' And he says, 'Where?' And I says, 'Here.' And he says, 'The soap, boy, the soap. It's flying in the air.' And then I press my tummy button again, and now I is visible. My daddy is squiffy with excitement. He says, "You is the invisible boy." And I says, "Now I was going to have some fun." So when I was out of the bath and I have dried myself, I put on my dressing gown and slippers and I press my tummy button again to become invisible, and I go down into the town and walk in the streets. Of course, only me is invisible, but not the things I was wearing. So when people seeing a dressing gown and floating slippers along the street, with nobody in it, there was a panic with everybody yelling, "A ghost! A ghost!" And people is screaming left and right, and big, strong policemen is running for their lives. And best of all, I see Mr. Grummett, my algebra teacher, coming out of a pub, and I float up to him and say, "Boo!" And he lets out a frightsome howl and dashes back into the pub, and then I was waking up and feeling happy as a whiff squiddler. Here is a picture of the dressing gown dream with the slippers. Pretty ridiculous, Sophie said. All the same, she couldn't resist reaching down and pressing her own tummy button to see if it worked. Nothing happened. Dreams is very mystical things. Human beings is not understanding them at all. Not even their brainiest professors is understanding them. Has you seen enough? Just this last one, this one here. She started reading. I has written a book and it's so exciting nobody can put it down. As soon as you read the first line, you is hooked on it, and you cannot stop until the last page. In all the cities, people is walking in the streets, bumping into each other because their faces is buried in my book, and Dennis is reading it and trying to feel teeth at the same time, but nobody minds because they is all reading it too in the dentist chair. Drivers is reading it while driving, and cars is crashing all over the country. Brain surgeons is reading it while they is operating on brains, and airline pilots is reading it and going to Timbuktu instead of London. Football players is reading it on the field because they can't put it down, and so is Olympic runners. While they is running, everybody has to see what is going to happen next in my book, and when I wake up, I'm still tingling with excitement about being the greatest writer in the world has ever known until my mommy comes in and says, "I was looking at your English exercise book last night, and really, your spelling is atrocious. So is your punctuation." Here's a picture of everyone reading the book. That's enough for now. There's dillions more, but my arm is getting tired holding you up. What are all those over there? Why they have such tiny labels? That is because one day I was catching so many dreams I was not having time or energy to write out long labels, but there's enough to remind me. Well, can I have a look? Sophia said. The long-suffering BFG carried her across to the open jars she was pointing at. Sophie read them rapidly, one after another. I was climbing Mount Everest, just my pussycat for company. Bottom. There we go. I was inventing a car that runs on toothpaste. I was able to make the electric light goes on and off just by wishing it. I was only an 8-year-old little boy, but I was growing a splendid bushy beard, and all the other boys is jealous. That'd be a funny dream. I was able to jump out of any high window and float down safely. I has a pet bee that makes rock and roll music when he flies. And these are just some of the dreams that BFG has in his dream collection. What amazes me, Sophie said, is how you ever learned to write in the first place. Ah, said the BFG. I has been wondering how long it is before you was asking me that. Considering you never went to school, I think it's quite marvelous, Sophie said. Well, how did you learn? The BFG crossed the cave, opened a tiny secret door in the wall. He took out a book, a very old and tattered book by human standards. It was ordinary size book, but it looked like a postage stamp in his huge hand. One night, he said, I was blowing a dream through a window, and I seized this book lying on the little boy's bedroom table. I wanted it so very badly, you understand, but I was refusing to steal it. I would never do that. So how did you get it? Sophie asked. Well, I borrowed it. Just for a short time. I borrowed it. Well, how long have you had it? Perhaps about 80 years. Soon I shall be putting it back. And that's how you taught yourself to write? Sophie asked. I was reading it hundreds of times, and I was still rereading it and teaching new words to myself and how to write them. It is the most scrumdiddlyumptious story. There's the book in his hand that he borrowed for 80 years. Uh-oh. Sophie took the book out of his hand. Nicholas Nickleby, she read aloud. By Doll's Chickens, the BFG said. By who? Sophie said. Just then, there came a tremendous noise of galloping feet from outside the cave. What's that? Sophie cried. That is all the giants zip-fizzling off to another country to guzzle human beings, BFG said. He quickly popped Sophie into his waistcoat pocket, then hurried to the cave entrance and rolled back the stone. Sophie, peeping out of her spy hole, saw all 9 of the fearsome giants coming past at full gallop. Where's you off to tonight? Shouted the BFG. We's all flush-buckling off to England tonight, answered the flesh lump eater as they went galloping past. England is a luscious land, and we is fancying a few little English chidlers. Shouted the maid masher, is knowing where there is a giggle house for girls, and I is guzzling myself as full as a froth blower. And I knows where there's a boggle box for boys, shouted the gizzard gulper. All I has to do is reach in and grab myself a handful. English boys is tasting extra lick-swishy. In a few seconds, the 9 galloping giants were out of sight. What did he mean? Sophie said, poking her head out of the pocket. A giggle house for girls? He is meaning a girls' school. He'll be eating them by the bundle. Oh, no, cried Sophie. And boys from a boys' school. It mustn't happen, Sophie cried out. We've got to stop them. We can't just sit here and do nothing. There's not a thing we can do. We as helpless as horse feathers. He sat down on a large, craggy blue rock near the entrance to the cave. He took Sophie from his pocket and put her beside him on the rock. It is now quite safe for you to be outside until they is coming back, he said. The sun had dipped below the horizon and it was getting dark. And with that, we will stop here and we'll see you next time.